All right, good evening. So we are back. There's been a lot more information that has come out regarding the Uvalde, Texas shooting at Robb Elementary School. And unfortunately, none of the news is good. So we wanted to revisit that situation and talk about it a little bit and talk about some of the things that we came up with that might be, ways that we can revisit the run, hide, fight philosophy, and also obviously revisit the way that law enforcement reacts to these unfortunate events, because despite the history and the things that we've learned so far since 1999, when Columbine happened, it doesn't seem that these lessons are really being, either they're not being taught or they're not being listened to, because it's not working. Um, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the initial police response to Uvalde and how there was a lot of miscommunication, some other stuff, and it has come out since then that the breakdown in law enforcement's response to this situation is nothing short of an absolute disaster. And I'm sorry to say it, because we're very, very big supporters of law enforcement. But the fact of the matter is that in Uvalde, Texas, in this set of circumstances, nothing was done right. We learned recently that 11:30 a.m. there's a panicked call by a teacher in the school to 911 advising that there is somebody shooting at the school. And at that point, the shooter was still outside the school. At 11:52 a.m., which is 22 minutes later, there's a picture. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so here we have a photo inside the first floor hallway of Robb Elementary, where we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 police officers, at least 1 ballistic shield, at least 2 long guns, and at least 2 of the officers wearing bulletproof vests. And then they leave. And this, by the way, I'm taking up the screen, this happens 9 minutes before the police chief tells everyone that the door's locked and they can't get in. So I think what this illustrates is 2 things. Number one, obviously, law enforcement needs to work on their reaction time here and exactly what it is that they do when they show up at one of these situations. But more importantly, it reinforces the concept that people have to be their own first responder, and that we can't wait for the police to help. We have to start helping ourselves before they get there, so that by the time they get there, we're already in the process of helping ourselves. And maybe we can save lives this way, because the fact of the matter is that the current methodology is not working. Izzy?
Right. So I agree with you, Dave. I think that there seems to be a sense of complacency, right? And that is, once we heard and once it was publicized that after Columbine, the police response to active shooter was no longer to stage outside and wait for the right team to go in, and the policy changed to whoever gets there goes in immediately. You do not wait. It's go in right away, engage the shooter, and put the threat down. I think that generated a sense of complacency, most likely on the side of the school, on we'll call it, let's say, the target of an active shooter or a school-related active shooter, in their reliance on first responders, right? Once you hear that whoever's coming is not going to wait and they're going to rush into the building, then I guess it becomes a little bit easier to fathom implementing this run, hide, fight, thought process and policy, which is, it's the recommended policy coming down from the FBI, from Homeland Security. It's the only thing that I'm aware of that's talked about in terms of a response from schools and institutions to an active shooter scenario, right? And, you know, I have young kids that are in elementary school, and I broached this subject with them as a result of what took place in Uvalde, and asked my kids, does your school run an active shooter drill? Are you aware, number one, of you know, an active shooter? And they're like, yes, the school does do an active shooter drill. And I said, what does that entail? And they said, the school alerts them that there's an active shooter. The teacher goes and locks the door, asks the kids to go into a corner. They shut the lights, and then whoever it comprises the security team comes around and bangs on the door and attempts to enter the room. That's the long and the short of their drill. I asked them what floor they're on. They said they're on the second floor. I asked if the windows of their classroom, if they have the windows. They said they do. I asked if they open. They said they don't. I asked if they had any way to get out of the room. They said no. I asked if they trained to evacuate the building. They said no. They're just told to hide under their desks in the corner of the room, and that's essentially it. So,
if I may, and I'm willing to bet you, that 90% of school children in America have the exact same plan. That's probably
right.
the situation, and that's got to change. I'm sorry, continue.
Right. It seems to me that implementing a mentality of run, hide, fight, right, or pushing a philosophy of run, hide, fight, just in theory, right? If I'm on the receiving end of that, if I'm being asked to implement a run, hide, fight policy in a facility that I am responsible for, right? If I am working under the assumption that by doing so, when I call 911, whoever's coming is coming and entering the building and rushing in as quickly as possible, that may seem like a viable option. But, you know, the FBI and private entities have been keeping statistics on these active shooters, and it's anything but that response. And or even if you're getting an adequate response from first responders, the problem is the threat, the person posing the threat, all right, has already breached the perimeter of the school. So they're no longer on the exterior of the school, which, again, if the threat is outside the school, hiding somewhere inside the school and locking down the school would be a good idea, because there's a degree of safety and insularity between you being in a lockdown classroom and a threat being on the exterior of the building. But I do believe that once a threat enters the building, all right, and breaches your perimeter and is now inside, all right, your response to that has to adapt to the situation. If you're going to pigeonhole and give us a one solution to a plethora of problems, that solution may not fit every scenario, right? And essentially, what schools have done, what it seems from the statistics and analyzing all these active shooters that are happening over and over again. Listen, just in 2022, 27 active shooters related to schools in 2022, resulting in 27 deaths just this year alone. So we're 6 months into the year, and already we have 27 active shooter scenarios in school and 27 people dead. The school's response, it seems, to active shooters today is really shelter in place. All right. It's not even implementing all aspects of run, hide, fight, because the minute there's an alert that there's an active shooter near, in, on school, I don't even know that they can identify or they relay where the active shooter actually is or where the threat is. It's just a generic alert, and the automatic response is lock the classroom, turn out the lights, and hide, right? Get under your desk.
That makes sense, like you mentioned before. That makes sense if, let's say, for example, I'm not going to use your children's school as an example, but a school on Main Street, wherever, in some town, gets a notice, hey, there's some guy roaming the area with a gun. He's, shot somebody at a key food a couple of blocks away. Locking down at that point makes sense. Bad actor outside, good people inside, lock the doors, lock the windows, and sit tight. That makes perfect sense. But as you said, once the threat has breached the perimeter, now it has to be, instead of locking yourself in the building with the threat, maybe get the hell out of the building. So let's talk about it in another set of terms. Fire. What happens in a fire, an emergency in a fire? Can you imagine? I mean, I don't have to tell you, it would be insane for a fire alarm to go off and the teacher to say to the kids, okay, children, let's all huddle in the corner. We're going to close the lights, close the door, and we're going to wait for the firemen to come. Who would do that? It doesn't make any sense. It's idiotic. The alternative is, all right, children, let's line up quickly and quietly, and in a single file, orderly fashion with no noise, we're going to get out of the building. That makes a little more sense.
Right. And what's fascinating is if you ask any child, all right, attending a public school or an elementary school or, you know, a middle school in the United States of America, you know, invariably they've experienced a fire drill, probably numerous fire drills, because I believe they count. I'm sorry?
They know exactly what to do to get out of the building safely.
Right. So I pose this question again to my kids, and I like to lead by example. I like to use real world examples. I don't just like to ponder a theory. I want to think about things. I want to think if there's merit to this theory. Does it make sense? Does it resonate? So, you know, I run everything by my kids. I think that they're a good test case. And I asked them if their school runs fire drills. They said, of course they do. And I said, how do you know if there's a fire? And they said, there's a fire alarm that goes off. And I'm like, how do you know when that alarm goes off that it means a fire? And they're like, because we train that when there's a fire drill, a particular alarm goes off. So when I hear that alarm, I automatically know it's a fire. And the process that they have is that if they're in class, the teacher lines them up. They are quiet. They line up in order. They don't make jokes. The teacher opens the door, checks the hallway, and then they move methodically, quickly, orderly to a designated fire exit. And I ask my kids, you know where your fire exits are in the school? And they're like, yep, they know where they are. They know that the doors have alarms and that if they push the bar on the door, it will trigger an alarm. And they can get out of their building during a fire drill in 2 minutes, thereabouts. So it's fascinating to me that it doesn't take a lot of time, effort, or thought to implement a fire drill. And we do this with such a degree of thoughtlessness, not thoughtlessness in the sense that we don't care about it, in that it's rote, it's second nature. It comes as a human reaction, and we do this routinely, and it's imbued and ingrained in our children from a very young age how to carry this out, so that, God forbid, if it happens, they do it. They don't think twice about it, and it desensitizes them in a way that allows them to react to these scenarios without panicking. Now, of course, thankfully, my kids haven't been through a fire alarm where there was an actual fire, and obviously they don't know what it's like if there were flames in the building or smoke in the building. But, you know, by correlation, again, you know, using your analogy, if the philosophy in fire response was the same as active shooter, can you imagine locking yourself in the room, waiting for those firefighters to come, and now smoke starts to come under that door, right? The locking of the door doesn't automatically equate to safety, right? Even if it's a fire rated door and it can withstand a certain amount of heat for a certain period of time, it's not airproof, it's not sealed, and smoke can get in. So what happens when smoke gets into your room? What happens if you can't open the windows in a fire situation where smoke's getting into your room, there's no fire in your room, but you can't get out, and now you're locked in your room, right? And the firemen are not there yet. I mean, it's suicide. And if you said to a parent that our school's fire drill policy is to shelter in place, you'd have a mass revolt on your hands. You'd have parents up in arms going, this is counterintuitive. It makes no sense. And I guess because we've never had to contemplate active shooters or some, look, in the United States of America, we send our kids off to school with the assumption being that we're sending them to a safe place, right? And that's why we go to work and we don't give a second thought to the safety of our children. We're entrusting them into people's hands, into a facility that we think is safe and secure. And if anything, if the last decade plus has taught us anything, it's that unfortunately, that's no longer the case. And when times change and situations change, we have to adapt and adopt new thinking and responses to threats we never had to contemplate before. And if we apply sort of, if we don't have to go far and we don't have to think hard about what we can do that makes a difference when we have a format that works in the area of fire drills, let's just say, that is easily replicatable, all right, and we can reproduce it and apply it in an active shooter scenario where the active shooter has now entered the building, right?
If I may, there's only one fundamental difference between your fire drill and an active shooter drill. And that is that the fire isn't intentionally trying to kill you. So that, for example, if a student or a teacher were to stick their head out of the classroom and look down the hall, if they see fire at one end of the hall, they can just run away down the other end of the hall. If there's an active shooter down at the end of the hall, it's tough to run away from that. However, just looking at a photograph of the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, this is a large building, one story. Why we didn't see people jumping out of the windows, initially, I don't know. I understand they lock everything down and whatever. But the fact of the matter is that children, especially elementary school, and this is another thing that I wanted to just touch on, elementary school children in theory could run and they can hide, but they really can't fight. You can't expect 8 and 9-year-old children and younger to fight an armed assailant. So as a result, really running away needs to be their first priority. It needs to be the first option should be running away. It shouldn't be even hiding, because hiding is not necessarily safety. Okay, just
well, and let me build on that hiding. All right, hiding works. It also, in one instance, if you're hiding in a location that the likelihood of being found is slim to none. It should be none, right? In an active shooter that takes place in school, the statistics are that the active shooter, more often than not, is a student from that school, returning to that school, all right? And then they're carrying out their reign of terror. The first 2 places that they go to are classrooms and cafeterias, dining rooms, all right? And we're essentially asking our children, or the schools are mandating that we lock down in the #1 target for an active shooter in a school scenario. That's not even hiding. That's not hiding. It's not even giving your child a chance. You're essentially saying, lock the door of the first place the active shooter is going to come look for you to do one thing, kill you. So, that's again, so, we touched on this, about the run, hide, fight philosophy. I agree. Elementary school children can't be relied on to fight. And in a school scenario, I don't believe that they can even be told or suggested that they hide when the very place that they're hiding is the primary target of the shooter, right? Which leaves us with one option, and that is to run. And yes, if you stuck your head out of your room and you see an active shooter, that's going to make things very difficult. But here's the other thing, with all the statistics that the FBI maintains when it comes to these active shooters, they analyzed many different things, be it law enforcement response, where it took place, who perpetrated the crime, the weapons that were used, how long the attacks lasted for. And by the way, these attacks are fast, all right? They're in under 5 minutes. The majority of them took place in under 3 minutes, right, from start to finish, all right? And in the cases where the most amount of casualties took place were cases where first responders were not responding, where faculty members and students were sheltering in place, locking themselves in classrooms, and that's where the damage was being done. In the cases with the lowest body counts were cases where either first responders, citizens, faculty, and or students responded and pushed back. In one instance, faculty members encountered an active shooter in a hallway in a school and engaged them in conversation and asked him to put his weapons down, and he complied. All right. There has to be some pushback. So even if you see someone in the hallway and there's an active shooting going on, your mandate and your edict should be to get as many people out of that building as quickly as possible. And we're not suggesting putting people in the line of fire, but we are suggesting if you had to get people out, then we have to start thinking of creative ways and creative thinking about the safest way to get people out of a classroom, through the hallways, to safety and away from that threat as quickly and as safely as possible. It doesn't mean locking the door. It doesn't mean turning off the lights. It doesn't mean hiding under a desk. It means taking action. We have to be proactive about it. There has to be pushback, and it's got to be decisive. It's got to be intentional. It's got to be fast, and it's got to be something, frankly, that's trained on. If we're training people that when the alarm goes off, lock your door, shut your lights, get under the desk, you're basically signing their death warrant.
That's exactly
and
what
you know what I mean? And I say that based on statistics alone. This is not me going, I know better than anybody else and I think better than anybody else. This is me taking FBI statistics, going through them, reading it, and going, look, it's there in black and white. The statistics don't lie, right? The scenarios are repeating themselves over and over again. And what's insane is that we're pushing this one answer solution to a problem where the body count is going up and the level of safety is declining, and the first responders are not doing what they're supposed to do for one reason or another. We don't even have to get into that, right? And we're scratching our heads going, why did 19 children get killed in Uvalde?
The reason is simple. It's because what we're doing is we are creating a target-rich environment of basically shooting fish in a barrel for these active shooters. And when you consider the fact that most of these active shooters are kids who went to that school themselves, which means they know the school layout, they know the school policies, they know the school's reaction because they might have trained on it themselves, and they know I'm just going to start going from classroom to classroom, and I'm just going to start, going to work, and I'm going to shoot as many people as I can. And when one of two things happens, I either run out of ammunition or I run out of bodies, the cops will be there, and then I will check out, because almost all of these people, these are suicide missions for these active shooters. Okay, they're there to go wreak havoc and go out in a blaze of glory. None of them intend to get caught. Almost all of them, it's basically public suicide. It's suicide by cop, and I'm going to take a whole bunch of people with me because I'm angry. And we can talk about the mental health aspects and the root causes and all that other stuff another time. Right now, the number one way I think that you stop or you drastically reduce the body count in these awful situations is to have people react appropriately. And if you remove the targets from the area, now you got an active shooter running around with nothing to shoot at. And that's the
right
situation.
And just another point. Look, we know that schools take safety and security seriously, and we know that since active shooters, became a thing and something with a great degree of frequency, there is undoubtedly updates in infrastructure, in security protocols, in access control, in guards at entries and exits and lockdowns and whatnot. But when your perpetrator, when your shooter is a student, right, then the access control becomes that much harder, because if it's someone that's supposed to be there, that has ID, that knows how to get into the building, knows the layout of the building, as you correctly pointed out, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to bypass the access control points if they belong, if they fit in, right? And now you got a real problem on your hands, because all these safety implements, all these safety devices that the schools are implementing and using fail. They don't work in that scenario. And just like the access control doesn't work for someone who's supposed to be there, this run, hide, fight philosophy doesn't work when your threat can breach all your security protocols and
knows where you're going to hide.
And knows exactly where you're going to hide. Exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't want to say it this way because it's not funny at all, but it's almost a joke. It's ridiculous. It's basically letting someone who already knows the whole game plan in, and then letting them run havoc while everybody who might be able to stop them hangs out outside and waits.
Right. So let's just take, hypothetical. If we were to analogize, let's say, an active shooter drill to, say, a fire drill, right? In a fire drill, there's basic components to a fire drill. There's an alarm, right? There's getting everybody staged, evacuating, and then evacuating them to another staging point away from the threat, away from harm.
Right.
So if we were to apply that to, let's say, an active shooter drill, like, what are some things that we can do in advance, proactively, right, to get people prepared? I would bet, number one, my money is on, most people don't know what gunshots even sound like, right? To even know, all right, something's wrong and I need to react to that. So I would say that we'd have to put together a training program that takes into account all the things that one might encounter, similar to a fire drill, right? Maybe write them out, discuss them, and then come up with a plan that can be as simple as a fire drill, right? And then implement that plan. You want to run that plan with, your school staff, and then when they get proficient at it, you want to bring the students in and run that drill with the students as well, right? And that should be going on with as much frequency, if not greater frequency, than fire drills. It's equally important. They're both designed to save lives.
So let me suggest something, right? Your active shooter drill will take several basic steps. Number one, there's going to be some indication that there's an active shooter, and then someone pulls a fire alarm. All right. The fire alarm noise, the bell ringing, ring, 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 and the lights flashing, or however it is that it indicates that there's a fire alarm, that shouldn't be a fire alarm anymore. That's a danger alarm. That means get out of the building. There's some danger. It doesn't matter if it's a fire, active shooter, something else, who knows? That noise means you need to get out of the building quickly, quietly, and you need to assemble at a pre-designated location. Football field, back parking lot, whatever it is, right? Alarm goes off. Teachers who are in classes, who are actively giving classes, are going to corral their kids together and get them out of the rooms quickly and quietly. You can take fire exits, you can take interior staircases, you take however it is that you get out of the building, and you get out. There's no reason why you can't simply run that. It's the exact same response to a fire, with the exception of, I got a person running around intentionally trying to kill people, as opposed to some area of the building that's burning and the fire is spreading. All right, but basically it's the same thing. And the fact of the matter is that, will that work for everybody in the building? No, it depends on where the active shooter is at the time that you start reacting. But will it help for most people? Well, 9 times out of 10, these active shooter situations, we got a single shooter. All right. Rarely we have a pair of shooters, right? We had a pair in Columbine. Actually, were there any other pairs besides Columbine recently? I can't think of one.
I don't think recently, not inside a school anyway.
No, correct. So we're usually dealing with a solo, lunatic who's running around trying to kill people. Active shooter can only be in one place at a time. It's not even like a fire. A fire can start here, spread. It can be in a lot of places at once. An active shooter can only be, actively shooting in one place at a time. Everyone else isn't there, and they can get out. And these are the sorts of things that should start being implemented in schools now, because number one, it costs nothing. You don't need any specialized gear or anything like that. You're already basically doing this. It just needs to be tweaked a little bit. And why it isn't being run, these scenarios not being run right now is beyond my understanding. I'm sure that there are some schools and some administrators who have realized that maybe this is the way to go, and they're doing some kind of training for their kids. But the fact of the matter is that the active shooter of lockdown, it's just not working anymore. And we need to revisit this philosophy and come up with a better philosophy, because otherwise kids are going to keep getting killed. That's all that's going to happen. This is a two-part problem. On the one part, in the schools, we need to start talking about a new method of reacting immediately instead of waiting. And with with law enforcement, I mean, they already have this in place. It just doesn't seem like it's really being implemented, where whoever shows up first, if you have a gun, you go in.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to how we started this, and that is, you had made mention, and this is something that you and I discuss all the time, and that is you are your own first responder, right? So if Uvalde has taught us anything, it's that at the end of the day, you are your best chance of survival, unfortunately. Absolutely. Right? And if you're going to wait for the cavalry, if you're going to wait for people to show up, if you're going to put your hope and prayers and reliance exclusively in the hands of somebody else, and for whatever reason, we don't have to come up with a reason, if for whatever reason they are unable, incapable, or unwilling to do what you hope they're going to do, then you're done, right? So we're not suggesting this merely because we think that active shooter drills and fire drills are the same thing. It's that not taking action yourself, if you're not going to arm yourself, if you're not going to learn how to defend yourself physically, if you're not going to learn how to fight, if you were to follow the run, hide, fight philosophy, right, then you owe it to yourselves, and you owe it to anybody in your care to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible and to implement a plan that allows that to happen. And that's it. That's the idea. That's the concept. That's what really has been bugging me every day when we're watching these hearings going on, and information now has changed so many times and lies have been revealed. It is heartbreaking, and then your heart breaks again, and your heart breaks again, and your heart breaks again, and you wonder, did 19 children have to die here? Could we have saved any of them? Could it have been 18, 17, 16? Could we? I don't even want to think about it. I want to find a solution. And if this helps get us closer to a solution, I'm not saying it's the solution or an only solution. It's a suggestion of movement away from complacency and giving up free will and not using common sense and hoping and putting my reliance on other people and saying, I'm going to take an active role in my self-defense, in my preservation of life, and anybody that I'm responsible for, and I'm not taking nothing as an answer anymore.
And keep in mind also that, like every other action plan, you can't just have one, right? Remember the PACE theory, okay? Primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. Where are the alternate plans here, right? In a lockdown situation, it's lockdown and wait. That's it. And when wait doesn't turn out to, have good guys show up to help you, what's your next step? Keep waiting? That's a major flaw. There is no alternate plan. So there needs to be a primary plan, an alternate plan, a contingency plan, and an emergency plan. Because if plan A doesn't work, you got to go to plan B. And if plan B doesn't work, you got to go to plan C. And if plan C doesn't work, now, you're going to have to do whatever you got to do. So
Dave and I thought, we were talking about this yesterday when we decided that we were going to make this. And we were saying that innovation requires thinking outside the box, right? And in this case, the box is the classroom.
Quite literally.
So innovation in an active shooter scenario taking place in a school requires thinking outside of the classroom. If you're thinking inside the classroom, the statistics tell the story. If you can start thinking innovatively outside the classroom of what I can do to get everybody outside the classroom, now you have a chance at survival.
Okay.
So you want to close out, Dave?
Well, I guess we spoke about a lot of things. There are a lot of things that still need to be done. You know, in the schools that we've been reaching out to and we've been discussing these issues, we've gotten a lot of good feedback, because the fact of the matter is that I think that now people are starting to realize, I hope that people are starting to realize that the methodology currently in place just isn't working, and we need to do something different to ensure that our children are safe. And by the way, this doesn't just go for school shootings. This goes for any mass shooting. If you're in a supermarket, if you're in a, you know, in a department store, if you're wherever it is, if you're in an office and somebody comes in and starts blazing away, you need to do something. All right. And people need to be keep that mindset. They have to be cognizant of it. And it's just something that's going to have to be dealt with, even though it's unpleasant, because the fact of the matter is, if you don't, people will just keep dying. And we'll have more and more of these shootings. It'll
Right.
be because the more successful they are, the more you'll have. And
so I want to leave everybody with a little teaser, if you will, and that is this: as Dave mentioned, we've been reaching out to a lot of schools, and it's sort of a fact-finding mission. What are you doing? Are you doing anything? Also suggesting this theory, and as Dave said, we've been getting a lot of positive feedback. And we are also working on things to do to help promote this theory. In other words, Dave mentioned, like, you know, we don't want to send somebody out into the hallway if we look out there and we see an active shooter. But we do want to get people out of the building. So that obviously causes us to think over time about possible things that we can do to help facilitate this theory, and do so in a way that gives the people we're asking to do this, administrators, teachers, school personnel and staff, the comfort and reliability to execute and carry out an evacuation plan with a degree of safety. We're not at liberty to discuss what that entails right now, but we are working on some pretty innovative, cool things that we will bring to you in time. And, you know, we hope that when we do, it's met with the same enthusiasm as some of these schools where we've promoted these ideas. And so far, it's getting a lot of positive traction. So stay tuned, because we have some cool things coming down the pike in the future.
okay, Fox 2 Sierra out.